The boy stood beneath the auction house awning while rain struck the street like handfuls of thrown gravel. And one by one, the men who came to inspect him turned away without making an offer. Some whispered that his pale skin was a curse. Others said his strange appearance would frighten the field hands. One buyer leaned close, stared into the boy's light-colored eyes, and muttered, "No plantation needs trouble that looks like an omen." The boy heard every word. He was only 10 years old, but he had already learned that people often spoke cruelly when they believed a child was too frightened to understand. His name was Elijah, though few people bothered to use it. To the traders, he was a number written beside a price that grew smaller with every passing day. Yet on that cold morning in 1851, as the auction crowd disappeared into the rain, one carriage remained outside. Inside sat a wealthy plantation widow named Margaret Bell. She was known throughout the county for her enormous estate, her sharp temper, and the strange fact that she rarely allowed visitors inside her home. Her body was large, and years of illness had made walking painful. Because of this, people often spoke about her behind closed doors, describing her size more than her intelligence, her wealth, or the authority she carried. But Margaret Bell had spent most of her life hearing people judge what they could see while ignoring what they could not. Perhaps that was why she noticed the boy. Or perhaps she had another reason entirely. No one knew. The auctioneer stepped beneath the awning and wiped rain from his face. "Madam Bell," he called, "you are still waiting?" Margaret looked through the carriage window. "I am. There is little left. I can see that. The boy is unusual," the auctioneer warned. "No one wants him." Margaret's eyes remained fixed on Elijah. "Then perhaps," she replied quietly, "no one has understood what they are looking at." The rain continued to fall as the carriage door opened, and the woman stepped down with the help of a silver-handled cane. That was the moment Elijah's life changed. But whether it changed for better or worse was a question no one could answer. The town of Red Hollow sat near the edge of the Mississippi River, surrounded by cotton fields that stretched beyond the horizon. During summer, the air smelled of wet earth, crushed leaves, and smoke from distant chimneys. During harvest, white cotton covered the land like snow, though everyone knew the beauty of those fields had been built through suffering. The Bell Plantation stood several miles outside town. It was one of the largest estates in the county, with a tall white house, wide porches, brick storage buildings, and rows of small wooden cabins hidden behind the trees. More than 100 enslaved people lived and worked there. Margaret Bell had inherited the plantation after her husband died. Her husband, Thomas Bell, had been feared throughout the county. He had controlled the estate through violence and punishment, believing fear was the only way to maintain power. When he died suddenly during the winter of 1848, many expected the plantation to collapse. It did not. Margaret took control. She dismissed several overseers, changed the work schedules, and ordered that children remain with their mothers whenever possible. These decisions did not make the plantation humane. Enslavement remained a system of ownership, separation, and stolen freedom. But the changes confused the neighboring plantation owners. Some believed Margaret had become weak. Others believed she was hiding something. The truth was more complicated. Margaret had spent 20 years living under the authority of a cruel husband. She understood what it meant to live inside a house where fear controlled every conversation. Yet she continued to own the plantation because the wealth, land, and power around her had come the only world she knew. She was both a prisoner of that world and one of the people who benefited from it. That contradiction followed her everywhere, and now she had brought Elijah into the center of it. When the carriage arrived at Bell Plantation, dozens of workers paused to watch. Elijah sat beside Margaret in silence. His skin was much lighter than that of the other enslaved children. His hair was pale, and his eyes were sensitive to bright sunlight. He lowered his head whenever the afternoon light entered through the carriage window. Margaret noticed. "Does the sun hurt you?" she asked. Elijah did not answer. "I asked you a question." "Yes, ma'am." "How badly?" He hesitated. "Enough." Margaret looked away. It was the first honest answer anyone had given her that day. When the carriage stopped, an older woman named Ruth approached. She was the head housekeeper and had worked at Bell Plantation longer than anyone could remember. "Who is this?" Ruth asked. "This is Elijah," Margaret replied. Ruth studied the boy. "And where will he work?" "Inside the house." Ruth frowned. "He is young. He will learn." "Learn what?" Margaret tightened her grip on the cane. "Whatever I decide." The answer ended the conversation. Elijah followed Margaret into the mansion. The house smelled of polished wood, candle wax, and old books. Portraits of the Bell family covered the walls. Their painted faces seemed to watch him as he walked through the long hallway. He had never seen so many rooms. He had never seen a house with carpet so thick that footsteps made almost no sound. But the silence frightened him. On the plantation where he had been born, silence usually meant punishment was coming. Margaret led him upstairs to a small room near the library. "You will sleep here," she said. Elijah stared at the bed. "Where's the floor?" "The floor is beneath the carpet." "No," he said. "Where do I sleep?" Margaret looked at him. On the bed. He did not move. The woman's expression softened for only a moment. "You have never had one." Elijah shook his head. For several seconds neither spoke. Then Margaret turned toward the door. "Ruth will bring you food." "Why did you buy me?" Elijah asked. Margaret stopped. The question hung in the room. Outside, wind moved through the trees. "You will understand later," she said. Then she closed the door. Elijah waited until her footsteps disappeared. He walked toward the bed and touched the blanket. It was soft, too soft. He wondered whether it was a trick. He wondered whether the woman had bought him because she wanted something from him. And deep inside, he feared the answer. During the following weeks, Elijah was taught to dust furniture, carry books, organize papers, and read simple words. Reading surprised him. No one had ever offered to teach him before. Margaret brought old books from the library and placed them on the table. "Letters are not dangerous," she said. "People say they are. People say many things because they are afraid. Afraid of what? Margaret looked toward the window. Of what knowledge allows a person to become. Elijah began learning every morning. He struggled at first. The letters moved across the page, and bright light hurt his eyes. Ruth placed dark cloth over the windows, making the room easier for him to see. Soon, Elijah could read signs, names, and short passages. Then he found something strange. Hidden inside an old desk was a collection of letters. The papers were tied together with faded blue ribbon. Most were written by Thomas Bell. Elijah recognized the name from the portraits. He opened one letter. The words were difficult, but he understood enough to feel fear. The letter mentioned missing money. It mentioned a child. And it mentioned a secret that could destroy the Babel family. Before Elijah could read more, Margaret entered. Her face changed when she saw the papers. Where did you find those? In the desk. Give them to me. What do they say? They are not for you. But you taught me to read. I did not teach you to search through my husband's private letters. Elijah held the papers tightly. Is that why you bought me? Margaret stepped closer. What did you read? You wrote about a child. I asked what you read. The child was hidden. Margaret's face became pale. Then Elijah noticed something he had never seen before. Fear. The powerful woman who controlled the entire plantation was afraid of a boy holding a few pieces of paper. Margaret took the letters from his hands. You will never open that desk again. Who was the child? No more questions. She left the room, but Elijah had already read enough to understand one thing. Margaret had not chosen him by accident. Somewhere inside those letters was a reason, and whatever that reason was, it had been buried for many years. That night Elijah could not sleep. Rain struck the windows. The plantation was quiet. Then he heard footsteps outside his room. The door opened slowly. Margaret stood in the darkness. She carried a candle. Elijah, she whispered. He sat up. What is it? There is something I should have told you. The candle shook in her hand. My husband kept a secret, she said, and I believe that secret is connected to you. Elijah stared at Margaret as the candlelight moved across the walls. For a moment, he believed he had misunderstood her. How could your husband know me? He asked. Margaret placed the candle on the table. I do not know if he knew you, she replied, but I know he knew about a child. What child? That is what I have been trying to discover. The answer brought more questions than comfort. Margaret sat heavily in the chair beside the bed. Her breathing was slow, and pain showed in her face. Years ago, she said, before Thomas inherited this plantation, he traveled through Louisiana. When he returned, he carried documents that he never allowed me to read. What was in them? I never knew. Then why do you think they are about me? Margaret looked toward Elijah. Because one letter described a boy with pale skin and light hair. The room became silent. Elijah lowered his eyes. He had spent his entire life being noticed because he looked different. People stared at him. Some treated him like a strange object. Others called him names. But he had never imagined that his appearance might be connected to a secret older than he was. Margaret continued. The letter was written 11 years ago. I am 10. Yes, then it cannot be me. Perhaps not. Perhaps, Margaret leaned forward. Thomas had many secrets. The next morning, Elijah began searching the library. He was careful. He opened drawers only when no one was watching. He studied old account books and plantation records. He read names, dates, and numbers. Then he found a list. It was hidden inside a ledger from 1841. Near the bottom of the page was a short entry. Payment received for transport of unnamed child. There was no name, only a symbol beside the words. A small black circle. Elijah copied the symbol onto a piece of paper. That afternoon he showed it to Ruth. The older woman looked at it and immediately closed the kitchen door. Where did you find this? In a book. You should put it back. What does it mean? Nothing good. Do you know? Ruth remained silent. Please, Elijah said. Ruth sat at the table. I saw that symbol once, she whispered, many years ago. Where? On a wagon. What kind of wagon? One that carried children. Elijah felt cold. Where did they go? No one knew. Were they sold? Ruth looked toward the door. Some questions bring danger. Margaret said I might be connected to a secret. Ruth's face changed. What secret? I do not know. The older woman stood. You must stop looking. Why? Because Thomas Bell was afraid of that symbol. Thomas is dead. Ruth shook her head. Dead men leave living secrets. Her words stayed with Elijah. Over the next several weeks, strange events began happening around the plantation. Someone entered the library at night. Books disappeared. The desk containing Thomas Bell's letters was moved. Then one morning, Elijah discovered that the page with the symbol had been torn from the ledger. Only the empty space remained. Someone knew he was searching. The person was watching him. Margaret became increasingly nervous. She ordered the servants to lock the doors after sunset. She dismissed 2 workers without explanation. She began keeping the letters inside a metal box beside her bed. Elijah noticed another change. Visitors arrived. They were wealthy men from nearby plantations. They met with Margaret in the dining room. The doors remained closed, but Elijah sometimes heard their voices. He is dangerous, one man said. He is only a child, Margaret replied. People are talking. Let them. They say you bought him for unnatural reasons. Margaret's chair scraped across the floor. Get out. The men left. Elijah stood in the hallway, frightened and confused. He had heard the rumors. Some workers believed Margaret had purchased him because she considered him a rare possession. Others believed she wanted to hide him from the world, but no one understood why. Not even Elijah. One evening, Margaret called him into her private room. She placed a small wooden box on the table. This belonged to Thomas, she said. Inside was a silver key. What does it open? I do not know. Then why give it to me? Because if something happens to me, you must find the answer. Elijah stepped back. What could happen? Margaret did not respond. Instead, she pointed toward an old painting. The painting showed the Bell family standing outside the plantation house. Thomas stood in the center. Margaret sat beside him. Behind them were several workers. One woman held a baby. Elijah looked closer. The child in the woman's arms had pale hair. His heart began beating faster. Who is that? Margaret stared at the painting. I do not know. But the child looks like me. Yes. Why is the painting here? Thomas brought it home. When? Before you were born. Elijah touched the edge of the frame. The child's face had been damaged. Someone had scratched across it. Who did this? Margaret looked away. Thomas. Why? He said the painting contained a lie. What lie? I never learned. Then a loud sound came from downstairs.